wry amusement that, of all people, Donald Trump had recently completed one of his pet projects to build a golf course in a landfill in the Bronx, adjacent to Ferry Point Park, both of which places I used to play in as a child with my bosom buddy. Because now it would seem the rich have a place to play in too at considerably more cost than what we could afford growing up in the Throgs Neck housing project, in which we lived out our formative years. There weren't that many options actually for us when it came to playtime. We had to be pretty creative, but you know, kids have that natural ability, I suppose, the creative audacity of youth, as I put it in a book I've been trying to write for some years now about the events that formed me as a man. And you have to realize that Throgs Neck Housing Project, thank you very much, Robert Moses, was literally cordoned off from the rest of the lower middle class neighborhood, and that you had, there wasn't even a public bus running into the project for years. So when we left, we had to walk quite a distance to get to the bus that would take us into the outer environs. We were right next to the Bruckner Expressway, which I actually remember in part being built. And in order to save time during the Great Passage, like say to the public library, or to get to the bus, we would cross through the expressway. It was rather dangerous, but we'd cut holes in the fence, and we would scamper across the highway, and in order to run our errands. In my case, it was not only to go to the public library, which I regard as the first modality of my salvation, but I had my first music lessons at a little shop just beyond the expressway. There was a little old Italian man, a little hunchbacked man, and he would charge you like $5 an hour for guitar lessons. He actually played in a band in the 40s, and he had a pretty good technique, and he helped me to learn to read music and give me a start in music. I mean, my mother couldn't afford to send me to any proper music school, so that was my only option. I have fond memories of the little old guy. Anyway, when it came to play, so we had the what we called the city dump. It was the landfill on one side, and then on the other was the immense St. Raymond Cemetery. That was another option where we could go to play. There was a field of grass behind the projects where I lived, and we would go there to fly kites. But it was just beyond there where the landfill was. It was immense, and it was kind of, at least for boys anyway, it was kind of like our little version of Africa. We could go exploring there and find all kinds of things which we would use to amuse ourselves. We were supposed to go after school. Now, when I came to school, you were either in Catholic school or you went to public school. I went to public school. And there was this place called the Community Center, which was actually in one of the project buildings on the first floor. And in the community center there was like a large open hall, and it was filled with games where you'd interact with your fellow denizens of the project. And then on the lower level there were kind of vocational spaces. And I remember really liking to go to the wood shop. I don't know who these teachers were, whether they were doing it on a volunteer basis or they were paid, but in retrospect I'm rather grateful to them. I learned the basics of carpentry there. And in the assembly, in this other space, you would have like games that were set up on tables. Like I remember one especially called table hockey, and you would have a little hockey stick, and you would just hit this wooden puck and try to score a goal, and it got pretty heated. It was pretty energetic, and thinking about those games, I can't help but think about something that we all used to do, which was play a game called Skelsey. Later I learned about things like marbles, but marbles were something of an exotic in the Bronx housing project. But we played this game called Skelsey, which required that you gather up a few bottle caps, and then you would melt crayons into them, so that you'd make these little pucks, and then you would go downstairs and you would take chalk and you'd make a kind of a Skelsey field, and it was a square, and in each corner there was a goal and numbered goal, and the object was to get your little puck into the center, kind of like a mixture of hopscotch and and hockey. And I don't know where the name Skelsey came from, but everybody seemed to know it, and we had a lot of fun playing that game. Now, I mentioned the landfill because you could go into the landfill and find all kinds of treasures. And at some point, I guess when we were about, 10, it became necessary to build what we called a go-kart. And to build a go-kart, you needed a couple of pairs of roller skates. There wasn't anything as sophisticated as inline skating back then. So you needed some roller skates, and you needed some wood, and you needed some kind of cart for the seat, and you needed to be able to steer the thing. So you'd need a bolt, some kind of heavy bolt. So you had to gather these materials, and you could usually find everything you needed in the city dump, and it had, of course, only two-wheel drive. That was the best we could do, and then we used to race each other in these go-karts. You always needed a second, because you needed somebody to give you momentum. I mean, in thinking back on it, it was all kind of funny, I suppose, but for us it was deadly serious, a real test of our incipient manhood, if you could call it that. So you had to be creative in the projects. Now, as I said, we also had Ferry Point Park, and then when you got to the park, especially on weekends, when you weren't confined to the community center, you could do whatever you could come up with. And my buddy and I actually used to do some very interesting things. We used to do music together, and my friend was very science and math oriented, and so we used to build model rockets together, and we'd actually they were inexpensive. You'd send to these companies, and they would you would build these rockets and made of balsa wood. It was all very exciting. They even had parachutes so that you could retrieve them. And we'd set them off in Ferry Point Park. It's strange when I think back on it, how little supervision we had. There were police, and you'd see them, walking their beat in the project, but we kind of tried to keep our distance from them because it was understood that they were there to keep us confined, to keep us in our place. But as soon as we got bicycles, we were able to explore more, outside the limitations of the project, and we made some very interesting discoveries. I remember once we actually found an abandoned miniature golf course, and this was in the area that was close to the famous Catholic school, St. Francis de Chantal, and so we'd go there, and there was even a popcorn machine. We wondered who was taking care of this place. I mean, there never seemed to be anybody in charge, and it was easy enough, to break into the equipment room. And I remember my friend's mother came with us once, and we played a round of miniature golf way before Donald Trump had made his appearance and gentrified the place. Yeah, we were a creative lot. You had to be back then. My buddy and I went to the same school for a while, and in those days we didn't call it middle school. We called it junior high school. And as I mentioned, we were both getting into music. I had started my guitar lessons when I was about 12, and so we were all very excited. I mean, this was the mid '60s, late '60s, going into the '60s, and and in middle school they had something that was called assembly, where all the grades, 7th, 8th, and 9th grades, were brought together. I'm not exactly sure why, and we were led in song by one of the teachers, or perhaps she was the principal. I can't recall now. And she was trying as best she could, bless her heart, to inculcate us with good values. And at the time, of course, all the rage was the Beatles, and my friend and I, of course, loved the Beatles music, and would listen to it as much as we could on our little transistor radios. And I remember one time she was going to teach us what she told us was her favorite song. And her favorite song was Moon River. Now you have to imagine, all these hundreds and hundreds of children trying to belt out this classic tune together. It was quite a chore. So in retrospect, I guess she had her hands full. To this day, I could still sing a few bars. Moon River, wider than a mile, we're crossing you in style, my way. I think. Anyway, this would occur on a weekly basis. These sing-alongs and these chautauquas of hers, and I think they were held on Wednesdays. And one Wednesday, she quieted us all down, and she said we're going to have a very special experience. Because we were going to have some guests, and they were locals, local students who had gone to the same school, to PS 101, and of course in retrospect I can't help but remember that it was in room 101 in George Orwell's classic 1984 where people were tortured until they went along with the authorities. But anyway, she was going to introduce us to these local gentlemen. There were about 5 of them, and they had formed a jazz quintet, and they were going to play for us some real music, as opposed to the putatively false music of the Beatles. So they played. And even at that stage in my musical education, I could tell they weren't that good. They were okay, but I really still thought the Beatles had it over them by quite a distance. Anyway, after this performance, she interviewed them, and she asked them, "What does it take to become a real musician like you guys are?" And they said, almost piously, "Well, you have to practice your scales. You have to learn the basics of classical music. And you have to really apply yourself and to make it kind of part of your life, etc., etc." And then we one by one, we were ordered to go up to the stage and where the piano was, and shake hands with each of these fine gentlemen, and greet them and thank them. So, what choice did I have? I got a good look at them, naturally, from this experience. And I also advised them to listen to a guy named Thelonious Monk, because even at that age I was getting a little precocious, frankly. And I thought they could benefit from his creative whimsy, his marvelous sense of harmony, which to my mind they kind of lacked. Well, not long after that, I convinced my mother to let me go to concerts. Mark and I, my bosom buddy, had discovered a group from Scotland called the Incredible String Band, and we were absolutely enchanted by them. They were a kind of fusion folk rock band, and they played a lot of instruments, and they had put out a record called the 5,000 Spirits, and we found out that they were playing at the Fillmore East downtown. So I managed to get tickets from which I paid for with my hard-earned money, because we had our ways in the Bronx of making a few quarters, helping the local old ladies to carry their groceries home from the supermarket, which was on the other side of the expressway. And so I went to my first real concert, and I was in a state of bliss. It was just the most wonderful thing I had ever experienced. And took the subway home, and it must have been around midnight that I got back to the projects. And since it was late and I wanted to get home, I decided to cross through to jump the chain fence and go through through one of the lawns that they had around the projects, and that led through the playground and to my building. And I was just, as I said, kind of euphoric. I was in a state of bliss after the experience of this wonderful music and seeing these people play live. It was just a very exciting experience for me. And I was wearing a certain article of apparel. I was wearing a black leather jacket. Now, I need rather more time than we have to tell you what it meant to actually own this jacket, because I had to work, to make money for this jacket. Now, I mean, it must have been something like, $60, which by today's standards is not much money, but back then it was a fortune. I mean, you talk about poor, we really were poor living in the projects. And so I was wearing this prized jacket, my black leather jacket, and so I'm crossing, through the park, and all of a sudden, 5 guys appear out of nowhere, and they're holding guns and knives, and I'll use a euphemism or two to avoid any obscenities, but they addressed me thusly: "Where the heck you think you're going in that jacket, motherfucker?" And what is a man to say? Well, as I looked at them, I couldn't help but notice it was the jazz ensemble doing a little moonlighting. And they come closer and asked for my wallet. Well, I wasn't that sophisticated. I didn't actually have a wallet, so they went through my pockets and took what money I had. And then one of them said, "What you need with a jacket like that, little man?" And I was really upset by that. They took my jacket, and I asked them, I said, "Why are you doing this?" And the leader of the pack, who was also the leader of the famous jazz ensemble, said to me, "Why you think we're doing it? To get high and get the hell out of here before we mess you up." Well, that stands out in my mind as a very formative experience. And when later I read a play by Shakespeare, which one was it? I think it was Pericles. There was this incredible line: "How courtesy would seem to cover sin." I thought about those guys. So, I kept walking. Now I was shaken up, and I didn't know how I was going to explain the loss of my jacket to my mother. And I went to sleep.
tell mom